Good morning, everybody. I'm John Casper with the Oshkosh Chamber, and welcome again to our series that we're doing with Angela Bergstrom with Step into Humility Leadership Solutions. She started a series called Bite-Sized Learning, which are great segments, great programs that we're happy that she's doing with us. Today, the topic is becoming a person of influence and how to positively impact the lives of others. So these have been, as I mentioned before, really good programs for everybody. And I'm glad you're doing this with us, and it really ups the quality of the programming that we've been able to do here. The session is being recorded, so we'll be archiving that and getting that out to others. So if you are listening in today, you can see it again, and if those who have missed it, they can see it another time. So with that, I am going to move it over to Angela, and she'll take it from here.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John. And by the way, it is an absolute pleasure to do these for the Chamber. So I always appreciate when you ask me to participate and just share some bite-sized learning with everybody. It's a great way to start the morning off. So right. I am going to go ahead and get my screen share up and running here so that we can get the presentation up. All right, looks like we're up and running. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this bite-sized learning, as John said. Just kind of give you kind of a shot in the arm of, some different topics around the subject of leadership or personal growth and development. That's kind of my forte. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Angela Bergstrom. I am the owner of Step into Humility Leadership Solutions. And if you want to learn more about me, my story, my business, I invite you to check out my website, stepintohumility.com. You can also follow me on Facebook. I have a business page at Step into Humility. You can track me on LinkedIn. I always welcome people to connect on LinkedIn and expand your network. It's always great to have a big network of folks in this area, especially. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just look me up by my name. And you can certainly reach out to me if you have any questions. I'll put this up at the end as well. But if you have any questions about today's programming or anything else, feel free to shoot me an email, angelabergstrom@stepintohumility.com. So as John said, today's topic is becoming a person of influence, more specifically, how to positively impact the lives of others. And, I picked this subject because, it feels like, I think for a lot of people, the month of January, when we sort of turn that calendar, we turn over that new year, I think for so many of us, it feels like a fresh start. It feels like that clean slate to say, okay, what am I going to do differently with my time in 2021? We have a new month, a new year, a new quarter, everything's fresh. What are we going to do differently? And so I felt like, especially in light of, the circumstances that we have all gone through in 2020, and certainly the first, 12, 13 days here haven't started out the greatest for us, unfortunately. So I just feel like these are topics that just can help us think about what can I personally do differently. It's so easy to have that outward focus and to look at what is everyone else doing, what are they not doing, to judge, to condemn, and to just sometimes just sit around and wait for everybody else to change. But the reality is we can't wait for others to change. We can't control what others do. The only thing we can control is ourselves. And so today what I'm going to talk about is influence. And the thing we have to understand about influence is that everyone is an influencer of other people to some degree, whether we realize it or not. And the thing is, it doesn't matter who you are. You don't have to be some big superstar or mega star. You don't have to be a celebrity in order to influence people. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't even matter what your occupation is. Sometimes people think, well, if you're a CEO, you have influence, whereas if you're a frontline leader, you don't have influence. Not true. It doesn't matter what your occupation is. If your life in any way connects with other people, you are an influencer. However, what we have to remember is that even though we have an impact on nearly everyone around us, sometimes it's people we know, sometimes it's total strangers. even though we have an impact on nearly everyone around us, our level of influence is not the same with everyone. So here's the crucial thing that I want you to remember as we go through today's little bite-sized learning. Your level of influence is not static. What that means is wherever you are at right now, maybe you're someone who hasn't had a strong influence on others. Maybe you're someone who's had a negative influence on others. Wherever you're at, the good news is that doesn't have to define you. You have the opportunity to increase or expand your influence and positively impact the lives of others. So that's what today's lesson is all about, is how can we become a person of influence if we're not really a very influential person to begin with, or how do we expand our current level of influence? So within today's lesson, there's really two learning goals that I'm going to touch on. It's to better understand influence, and then to show you some ways that you can increase your influence. And I want to just draw your attention to the ripple. You see the little icon on the screen above the word influence, that little ripple effect. And the whole theme, the background on all my slides today have that drop of water kind of going into the pond or the lake or whatever it is. I want you to think about your personal ripple effect. That's really what influence is about. We're that drop of water that hits the surface, and then there's this ripple effect that goes out. And sometimes it's a small ripple effect, other times it's a rather large ripple effect. And what I want you to think about as we go through today's bite-sized learning is, how big is your ripple effect? And more importantly, who's in that ripple effect, or who's within your sphere of influence? That's going to help us as we figure out the areas that we need to work on if we want to expand and increase our influence. Now, the other thing I want to mention at the start of this is that leadership and influence go hand in hand. If you have influence with others, you are leading. Okay? If you don't have influence with others, guess what? You're not leading. So I want you to think about that as well, that influence, it's not just about titled leadership. When I talk about leadership, we all exhibit characteristics of leadership. You don't have to be in a specific role. You don't have to be a CEO or a president or a VP or a director. You don't have to have those titles in order to lead others. We often lead more by our actions and our behaviors and our words. So just think about the connection between leadership and influence. If you have influence with others, you're leading. If you don't have influence with others, you're not leading. And it's just like John Maxwell says, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Very simple definition. So as we dive into our content today, the first thing that we are going to do is an influence inventory. I am going to show you some questions that you can ask yourself to kind of gauge where you're at with influence. And the reason I do this is because when it comes to any kind of personal growth and development, the most critical actions that we can take, or that we should engage in frequently, include self-assessment, reflecting, and seeking feedback. So that's why we're going to start off today with this influence inventory, and particularly asking ourselves 3 questions. Who do you influence? How do you influence? And why do you influence? So we're going to look at each of these in a little more depth. All right, starting with who do you influence? Now, this relates to that ripple effect that I just talked about a minute or two ago. The principle here is this. When you think about who you influence, the principle is this. As a leader or as an influencer, I attract who I am, not who I want. I attract who I am, not who I want. So the reason this is important is when we take the time to examine who we influence, okay, we will often find that those people are very similar to us. They're very similar to us because we tend to seek and attract that which we are, not that which we want, and sometimes that which we need. So this is really important because when we consider who we influence, it shines a lot of light on ourselves. So let me give you an example here. Let's say that, when you think about the people who you influence, like who are those people who want to listen to you? Who are those people that maybe mimic your behaviors or mimic the things that you like? If you find, as you look at who you influence, that maybe you're surrounded by people that you don't like very much, or people who irritate you for some reason, or people who maybe you're not very fond of, as an example, what are the things they're doing that make you feel that way? There's a good chance that, guess what? You yourself exhibit some of those same traits and characteristics and behaviors. Now, this isn't to say that's always the case, but you can learn so much about yourself when you actually take the time to think about who you influence. Who are those people within your sphere of influence, and how do you feel about them? What do you like about them? What do you dislike about them? Shines a lot of light on yourself. And obviously, sometimes you might learn a few things that maybe you're not too excited about. But again, if we don't take the time to do that, how are we going to improve? So who do you influence? The next question we're going to look at is, how do you influence? So this relates to the method or style of influence and leadership that we employ or that we exhibit to others. Now, here's the principle around this one. How I influence people will determine three things. How I influence people will determine how many people I influence. It will determine how long I have influence with them, and it will determine how effectively I influence them. And all of those things are going to be impacted based upon our method of influence. So the next thing I'm going to do is walk you through 7 methods of influence that people commonly engage in. And these 7 methods of influence are listed from worst to best. Worst if you don't want to have positive impact on others. Best are the ones that you want to look at if you do want to have a positive impact with others. So the first one we're going to start with is force. Now, within this method, you use force to get people to respond and do what you want. And ultimately, there's no choice in the decision. It's kind of a situation where it's not up for debate. It is what it is. Here's the problem with this method. Even though you may get people to respond, and people who use force, they certainly do get people to respond to them. Even though you're able to get people to respond, they're not doing it for you. They're not doing it because they want to. They're not doing it for you. They're doing it for themselves. And usually it's to protect themselves. When you use this method and people respond to you, there's absolutely no buy-in whatsoever from the people that you lead. And the only way that you will ever get them to do anything going forward is by way of force. So not only does this method make things way more difficult than they need to be, it's highly inefficient and ineffective, okay? And there are people who use this method every day. The next one is intimidation. This one is commonly known today as the command and control method. It's very similar to force, but the biggest difference here is that there is a choice. And guess what that choice is? My way or the highway. So even though there's a choice, it's not a very good choice for the person on the receiving end of the intimidation. And again, if a person doesn't comply or respond in this situation, there are typically consequences. So if people do what you want them to or comply, again, they're not doing it for you, they're doing it for themselves because they know that there's going to be some kind of consequence. Like, in the workplace, for example, if someone uses a method of intimidation, well, you do it like this or else you're out, you're fired, you're out of here. Well, not everybody can afford to lose their job, can they? So, people will comply, but again, they're doing it for their own reasons, not for you. Now, this style is still being practiced today, but like force, it is also ineffective, and it really contributes to a high turnover. A lot of companies that have this type of a leadership style or a leadership culture have significant turnover. And again, you might be able to get people to do the things you want them to do, but they're not doing it for you. They don't have buy-in, they don't trust you, they don't have confidence in you, and they're not going to willingly help you on their own going forward. So just something to think about. All right, next one is manipulation. So when we talk about manipulation, it means that we influence a person or a situation cleverly, unfairly, or unscrupulously. And in this situation, there's usually a winner and a loser. So typically when people are manipulated, I'm sure all of us at some point in our lives have been manipulated perhaps by someone, whether we knew them or didn't know them. And oftentimes when we experience that, we leave feeling taken advantage of, or maybe we feel misled or played. We feel like we're on the losing end of the situation when people manipulate us. And you have to understand that when you operate from this method of influence, if that's the way that you influence others is through manipulation, you're not operating from a place of trust or strong character. Eventually what happens is people will catch on to your methods. They will catch on to the fact that you're manipulating them. And guess who's going to end up on the losing side of the situation when that happens? You are. So there's really not a whole lot to be gained from the method of manipulation, just like there's not much to be gained from force or intimidation. And the last one on the worst list is positional. Some people like to use their position as a means of influence. So what happens is they lead people to believe that they have to follow them because I'm your boss, I'm your manager, I'm your leader, I'm an authority figure, so you have to do what I say, you have to follow me. And again, with this one, just like in the other methods, you don't have that element of buy-in, you don't have the trust, you don't have the respect. All of the things that contribute to effective influence or positive influence in leadership don't exist within these methods of influence. So you should see a theme with these first four methods, and hopefully you're gaining an understanding of why these methods are not effective. If any of you out there on the webinar this morning find yourself falling within some of these methods, and you're finding that you don't have a strong level of influence or maybe a positive level of influence, these are some areas to look at. How can you adjust some of your behaviors? Can you work towards employing a different methods of influence? So let's take a look at what the best methods of influence are, starting with exchange. So I like to think of this as the win-win method. In this situation, we both win something, both parties. I also like to think of it as saying that both parties essentially have skin in the game. We both have something to gain. Usually with a win-win situation, there's a level of trust, respect, and confidence on both sides, because if we both have something to gain, well, then now I can start extending trust. Whereas in the other methods, if you're the only person that has something to gain and everyone else has everything to lose, well, there is no trust there. There's not a strong character in that situation. There is very little to no respect in that situation because you haven't done anything to earn people's respect. So with this method, again, you have that trust, that confidence, and when you use this method, that's where you start to build that buy-in with the people around you and the people that you're trying to influence. They feel more comfortable moving forward with you. When we talk about persuasion, if you think about persuasion, it requires us to provide sound reasoning. We kind of have to state our case, so to speak, and convince someone to do or believe something. So with persuasion, it actually takes effort on our part. If you think about the other methods that we just talked about, force, intimidation, there's not a whole lot of effort involved in that. It's just, here's what it is, do what I say, end of story. With this, you actually have to put some effort into it. And if you do persuasion with the right motive, or you use persuasion with the right motive, people will follow you because they want to. People often have a degree of trust when they allow themselves to be persuaded. I'm sure all of us out there have been persuaded at different times, whether it was, when we were purchasing something, or maybe somebody was convincing you to do something or doing something or whatever that looked like. There had to be some level of trust by you in order to follow that person, in order to be influenced and persuaded by that person. So with persuasion, we have a choice in the matter. And when we have a choice in the matter, that makes it easier for us to follow somebody. And when we follow them, it means that they have earned our trust, they have earned our buy-in. And the last method I'm going to talk about this morning is respect. Respect. This one, of course, I will say is the best method of influence. It's the best method of leadership. You know, this is when people follow you because you have earned their respect. You have put in the effort. You have demonstrated to them that you are someone who is trustworthy. You have demonstrated that you have strong character, that you care about their part in whatever it is that you're doing. And when people have that respect for you, guess what? They're willing and happy to oblige. They want to move forward. They want to participate. They want to help you out. So when you think about these 7 methods of influence, it's really a no-brainer, especially these 3, how they can help you to expand your influence with the people around you. But that being said, I will acknowledge that it isn't easy to change. It's never easy to change our ways. I mean, it takes a lot of work. And, I think for a lot of people, the hardest part is actually not necessarily doing the change, it's making the decision to move forward with the change. So, think about these 7 methods. Think about, do you fall within one method more than others? Which side are you on? Are you on the best side or the worst side? One of the questions that I often get when I talk about these methods of influence is people will say, well, is there just one method of influence that people usually use? Can you use multiple methods of influence in different situations? My answer is this: based on what I have seen, what I've observed and experienced, is that yes, people do operate using different methods of influence. I don't see a lot of people that have just one method per se. What I have found, however, is that you're either on one side or you're on the other. And what I mean by that is, I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of people operating on those first 4 that I shared, the worst list. And, they will bounce around between all of those. Okay. But what I don't see is them using any of the methods on the best side. And that makes sense, because if you think about it, like I said before, the methods on the worst side, there's no trust, there's no respect, there's not a lot of effort put into using those methods. Okay. It's really difficult to then use the best methods, which require things like respect and trust and strong character. So that's what I have seen, is that, people do use different methods, but it's often one side or the other. It's not a combination of both. Okay, the next question in our influence inventory is, why do you influence others? So we just talked about who we influence, how we influence. Now we're looking at, why do you influence others? So this one is all about motive. What is your motive when it comes to influencing others? Some people do it for fame, for notoriety, for popularity. I mean, that's been a big thing with, you hear of, social media influencers and celebrity influencers. A lot of that has to do with fame and popularity. Whereas others, they look at influence as a way to make a difference in the lives of others. They look at it from that standpoint of, how can I make a positive impact in the people around me, or in the community around me, or in the workplace, or at home, wherever you are. Now, the principle here with this one is this: why you do something will ultimately determine what you do. Why you do something will ultimately determine what you do. So this is a great place for you to ask yourself, do you have a selfish or a selfless nature? And the reason you ask yourself that is because if you operate from a selfish nature or a selfless nature, whichever of the two you feel like you operate from, what you do is going to reflect that. So if you operate from a selfish nature, your actions are going to reflect that. People are going to be able to pick up on that pretty quickly. Whereas if you operate from a selfless nature, people will also be able to pick up on that relatively quickly. You know, those characteristics, traits, skills, abilities, methods, all of those things that you use will reflect your why you want to influence others. Now, there's something I just want to kind of throw out there as a side note. When we talk about questioning our motive, it's different than questioning our character. When you think about motives, they are usually attached to specific situations, and they're often short in duration. Character, however, is connected to the heart, and it's with you in all situations. So here's why this is important, and here's why I'm sharing this side note. When you think about motives, they're temporary, character is permanent. So you can have a temporarily flawed motive, yet still have a solid character. However, if your motives are continually wrong or they're continually flawed, that is the result of a bad character. So if you think about, you know, every once in a while, maybe you are usually a very selfless person and an other-centered person. But on occasion, you might find yourself in a situation where you want to be a little selfish, or you feel like you need to be a little selfish. And that's what your motive is. If you do that once in a great while, you still can have a strong character because, you know, let's say 90% of the time or 95% of the time, you have that selfless motive. Every so often, that selfish motive creeps in. That still allows you to have a strong character. But if you're the kind of person who constantly has those selfish motives or those flawed motives, that unfortunately for you is a character issue. And you have to kind of look at, do I want to keep having this poor character, or am I going to do something to strengthen my character? And the last question that we ask in our influence inventory is, how can I increase, or how to increase my influence? How should I increase my influence? When we reflect on these questions, it allows us to establish areas and identify areas that we can work on. So in the next session, what we're going to do is take a look at some very specific things that we can do to increase our influence. First off, two pretty simple things. Well, simple for some, I should say. Two things that we can do to increase our influence is, one, consistently add value to others. Finding ways to always add value to the people around us. That's that selfless nature, adding value to others. The second thing we can do is add value to ourselves. Now, I realize when I put that up there and I share that, some of you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, if I add value to myself, isn't that kind of that selfish nature that we were just talking about? And the answer is no, because here's the thing. When we add value to ourselves, it allows us to become more valuable to others. So, you know, if we think about like personal growth and development, for example, if we learn and grow and we find better ways of doing things, and we incorporate that into our daily behavior, our daily practices, other people, not only are they on the receiving end of that, but they hopefully will pick up on some of the things that we're doing and learn from our example and do some of those things then to others. And that ripple effect that I talked about at the beginning continues to grow in a positive manner. So it might seem like adding value to ourselves is a selfish thing, but truly it allows us to be more valuable to others and add more value to others, which then increases our influence and impacts lives in a positive manner. Now, there are 10 other attributes that a person of influence demonstrates. They have integrity with people. They nurture other people. Person of influence has faith in people. They listen to people. They understand people, or they seek to understand. They enlarge people. They navigate for others. They connect, they empower, and they reproduce other influencers. So in our time together this morning, I won't be covering all 10 of those, but I am going to tap in a little further into two of them: integrity with people and listening to people. So when we talk about integrity, it's a word that's used a lot, it's thrown around a lot. But integrity is the quality of being two things. Very important that you catch both of these. It's two things. It's the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. Now, another way of saying this, or a simple way of saying this, is it's always doing the right thing. Some people will say it's doing the right thing when nobody is watching. Integrity is also doing the right thing when everybody is watching. It's doing the right thing at all times, having those strong moral principles and being honest. And the thing about integrity is that it's not determined by our circumstances. It's not based on our credentials. And it's not to be confused with our reputation. Okay, integrity is different. And the thing about integrity is that it is a really, really difficult attribute to score 100% on. If we look at our own integrity and we kind of try to measure it and figure out what is our score right now, are we scoring a 70, are we an 80, a 90? It's really, really difficult to score 100%. Because here's the thing, if we're honest with ourselves, we have all done things and we do things that keep us from that perfect score, okay? Sometimes it's really, really bad things. Other times it could be something just as simple as a little white lie. All of us have probably told a little white lie in our time. And we do it with positive intent, right? We maybe tell that little white lie because we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings or we don't want to upset somebody. Even though we do it with that positive intent, it still deducts points from our integrity score because we're not being completely and totally honest. If that makes sense. And naturally, trust is connected with integrity because integrity allows others to trust you. If you do the right things, if you have those strong moral principles, it makes it really easy for people to trust you. And when we think about relationships, whether it's our personal relationships or our professional relationships, trust is the single most important factor in the success of those relationships. Said another way, trust is the glue that holds people together. And it really is the key to becoming a person of influence. So what I'm going to do next is share with you 5 questions you can ask yourself, more kind of self-assessment reflection questions to think about where are you at with integrity. If you had to score yourself, kind of where do you fall? How are you doing in the subject of integrity or in the category of integrity? So the first question to ask yourself is, do I have good values? Do I have good values? I like to take this even further and ask people, do you even know what your values are? You'd be surprised at how many people don't really truly know what their values are, or more importantly, what their top 5 values are, their top 10. I actually have a values exercise that I do with groups to help people narrow down their top 5 values. And the reason I have them do this is because when you know your top 5, those values act like a compass that guides you in the right direction. If you know what your values are, especially your top 5 values or your top 10, those things determine how you live your life. You think about your values, it determines how you live your life, how you make decisions, how you treat others, how you conduct yourself, and so on. Values are very, very important. So, just kind of do some self-assessment on, do I have good values? What are my top 5 values? And am I using those values to do the things I just mentioned, to make decisions, to live my life, how I'm treating people, so on and so forth. And then the second question is, do I practice and model my values? Once you determine what those values are, it's important to make sure that your actions and your behaviors are congruent with your values. Don't say that you have a value and then act completely opposite of that or act different of that. And I'll give you an example. Accountability is an example of a value. Accountability, it's taking responsibility for both actions and outcomes. So if you say that you value accountability, let's say that's one of your top values, you value accountability, yet you blame everyone and everything else for your circumstances, your integrity is going to take a hit. Okay? To the contrary, if you value accountability and then you step up and you take accountability in all areas of your life, that is going to deepen and strengthen your integrity. So it's kind of, people say walking the talk, so to speak. So, just kind of think about that. Are you actually practicing and modeling the values that you say you have? The third question, do I place the interest of others above my own? This one is pretty self-explanatory. This kind of dives back into that question I asked earlier. Do you lean toward selfishness or selflessness? Obviously, the more selfless you are, the stronger your integrity is going to be. The fourth question to ask yourself here, am I accountable to others for my actions? Just talked about accountability. Are you accountable to others for your actions? Do you own up to the things you do, both good and bad? I see a lot of people that, they're more than happy to take accountability when things go right and things go well and they look great, but not so much on the other end. It's very hard to take accountability when you mess up or, when you're not doing well on something. Very hard. But the more you're willing to take that accountability, the stronger your integrity is going to be. And the stronger integrity you have, the more positive of an influence you're going to have on others. And that fifth question, I feel like this is probably the most difficult of the 5 questions to ask, is do I like who I am? And this is kind of that question, a lot of times when I teach courses and do educational things, I often start out, I do a lot with behavior change, that kind of stuff. And I always say to people, think about it as looking in a mirror. When there's this 2-sided mirror that I use. It's got a regular reflection. When I flip it over, it has that magnified reflection. And I'll tell you, I hate looking in that magnified version because it shows a lot of things that I cannot see in my normal everyday reflection. But if I don't look at those things, if I never look at that magnified side of the mirror, I won't know the areas that I need to work on. So that's really what this question does, is it forces you to look in that magnified side of the mirror. The things that are normally hidden from our standard reflection, it's kind of like being truly, utterly honest with yourself. And I think when I ask this question, Abraham Lincoln sums it up really well for us. He once said a quote, "When I lay down the reins of this administration, I want to have one friend left, and that friend is inside myself." So it's really a matter of, do you like who you are? Can you sleep at night? Do you feel good about the things that you do, the way you treat people, the decisions you make, the way that you influence others? Do you feel good about that? Do you like who you are? Some people might be able to answer that question very easily. I think for a lot of us, though, if we're truly, truly honest with ourselves and we really dig deep into our own integrity, we're going to find that there are quite a few blemishes there and some flaws. And, again, the good news is you can start taking steps to improve that and to strengthen your integrity if you so choose. Now, one thing I always like to mention here too, when we're talking about integrity, is that we can have strong characteristics like honesty, but still not be strong in integrity. So I want to just share with you a quick little story to demonstrate what I'm talking about when I say that. And this story actually comes out of a book called The ABCs of Leadership by, I think his name is Tom Massey. It's a great little leadership book. It talks about a variety of different topics on leadership. And with each one, he has like a little story or a parable. So I just kind of want to share with you the one that he has for integrity. So in this story, there's a young man and a young woman, and they are driving up to the lake to have a little picnic dinner. On the way to the lake, they decide to stop off at a little store to get some chicken and some, picnic type stuff, just kind of pick up their food and their little beverages and stuff. So they pull up to the store. The young man gets out of the car, goes into the store, gets the chicken, gets, the food, takes it up to the counter. And it was pretty close to closing time when he had stopped by the store. So while he was doing a little bit of shopping, the manager was actually in the process of closing out the cash register. So, had the receipts and had checks and credit card receipts and some cash and different things. And he was working on that and happened to put it in a box that was the exact same type of box that the chicken was in. So anyway, He goes ahead, he rings up the young man. The young man takes his bag of food, goes back out to the car. He and his lady, they drive up to the lake and, put their blanket out and they're getting their food out. They open up the box to find a bunch of money and receipts and checks and the deposit that the manager had been working on. He had mistakenly placed the wrong box in the bag. So, the young man, they very quickly pack everything back up, jump in the car, rush back to the store. He knocks on the door because it's locked by the time he gets back. The manager opens the door, lets him in. And as you can imagine, the manager is just gushing with, thankfulness and gratitude and just so happy that, this person came back and did the right thing. And so the manager, he's so excited about this and so grateful. And he says to the young man, I have a friend who works at the newspaper. I'd really like him to come and take a picture and write an article because this is such a positive story and people need to know that there's good people in the world and that they do the right things. And he kept on insisting and the young man said, no, can't do it. I don't want a news story. I don't want it. Manager kept pushing and pushing and pushing. Finally, the young man says to him, look, I can't get my picture in the paper. I don't want a news story done because I'm a married man and the woman in the car is not my wife. So the moral of that story is you can be honest and do the right thing, but still not have solid integrity. And the reason why, it goes back to what I said earlier, it's not just about honesty, it's about having those strong moral principles. And it's about doing the right thing all the time, not just once in a while. So in that story, the young man did the right thing with the money, but he was not doing the right thing in other areas of his life. So just something to think about, just kind of measure those things, looking at your honesty, your moral principles, your values, your integrity, look at all of that to see, are there areas that you need to improve in to strengthen that integrity? Because having that strong integrity, as I said before, is going to help you have that positive influence on others. All right, and the last section that I'm going to cover here is talking all about listening. And, listening is truly one of the most important things we can do with another person. And if you want to increase your level of influence, listening is one of the, I would say, probably quickest things you can do, but by no means is it the easiest thing you can do. So I'm going to just take a few minutes here to talk about some different aspects of what you can do to be a better listener. And as I get started with this part, I just want to share with all of you that, communication and listening is something that I have taught, I have studied and practiced for probably 9-10 years now. I've been involved in communication skills. And it's pretty remarkable. Pretty much every class I've ever had, people come in and kind of puff out their chest and I'm a great listener. And then we start talking about what it actually takes to be a good listener. And it's pretty interesting to see how many people realize that they were way off base when it comes to listening. So I'm going to just share a few tips with you to help you become a better listener and also expand your influence in that process. So I'm going to use a little acronym. It's called LADDER to talk about 6 different aspects of being a truly effective listener. So we start with L. L represents look at the speaker. So basically what this means is that you are fully present with the person. And in order to be fully present, that means you have to be free of distractions. And you also have to have the mindset that the other person is the most important thing to you at that moment. Not your phone, not stuff going on outside the room or the office, not what's on TV. That person is the most important thing for you in that moment. And I have to say, this is something that has become incredibly difficult, and it's almost become a lost art, due much in part to technology. Technology is such a, I'm going to say, just a little bugger when it comes to listening. Because think about it, when you're talking to someone, you're listening to someone, I'm sure we've all experienced this and probably do this ourselves, but we have our cell phones, right? Talking to somebody or listening, you're supposed to be listening to somebody, your phone goes off. What do? Typically people instantly grab that phone. If it's in your pocket, if it's on your desk, wherever it's at, grab that phone and start scrolling to see who's calling me, who's texting me, what's the notification. Some people do it with their watches. They have those Apple watches, look at their, watches, and they're punching, things on the screen. When you're doing that, you're not listening to the other person. And what's so funny is people will say, oh, just keep going. I'm listening. Yeah, I'm listening. No, you're not. You're not listening. Here's the thing about multitasking, folks. So many people think multitasking is this awesome, wonderful thing. Sure, you can do 5 things at once, but guess what? You're not doing any one of those 5 things well, because you're not entirely focused on any one of those 5 things. Your focus is divided between 5 things, just like if you're listening to someone else. Now you have divided your focus. So when you're listening to someone, do whatever you can to eliminate distractions. If it means completely turning off your phone, turning off the television. If you're washing dishes, you stop washing dishes. If you're in your office, you shut the door. You do whatever you can to eliminate as many distractions as possible so that you can give that person your full attention. All right, next on the ladder acronym is the letter A. So A stands for ask clarifying questions. If you're taking notes, I want you to write the word clarifying in all capital letters, underline it, circle it, star it, highlight it, whatever you need to do. The word clarifying questions. And here's why I'm saying that. When you're listening to somebody, asking questions is one of the worst things you can do. I'm going to say that again, because this one always catches people. People do not like it when I tell them this. Asking questions is the worst thing you can do when you're listening to someone. And I highly discourage people from getting in the habit of asking questions. The only exception to that statement is clarifying questions. If there is something that is up for interpretation that will help you better understand the situation and will help the other person better understand their own situation, then you can ask a clarifying question. So let me elaborate on this just a little bit further. Why I'm saying this, because I'm sure a few of you are going bonkers out there listening to me say this, because you're like, what do you mean I can't ask questions? How am I supposed to solve the problem if I can't ask a question? That in and of itself is the problem, folks. When you're listening to somebody, it is not your job to solve their problem, okay? People have the ability to solve their own problems. And when they come to us and they ask us to listen, that allows them to process and think through and digest everything that's going on, and it allows them to come to their own solution. It gives them that space to think through it. However, if we ask questions, all we're trying to do is figure out what we need to solve the answer, provide an answer, give advice, make a judgment, tell them our story. When we ask those questions, it's not for the other person, it's for our purpose. It's not for the sake of understanding, it's for us. We just need to have that information. And when we listen, it is not about us. We don't call it talking for a reason. We are listening. If it was meant to be talking, we would call it talking, right? We're talking about listening here. It's 100% about the other person. So let me give you a really quick example that I often use here. Let's say somebody comes up to me and they say, hey, Angie, I'm having problems with a coworker. The way that most people would respond is to say, well, who's the coworker? Here's the thing. Do I really need to know who the coworker is to listen to this person? Do I really need to know who the coworker is to help them solve their problem? No, I don't. The answer is no. For those of you saying yes, I'm telling you the answer is no. I don't need to know who the coworker is. Okay, what's going to happen if I know who that coworker is? All of a sudden, I just feel like I need to know who the coworker is because, again, I need to give them a solution, right? And then if I know who the coworker is, I can either throw a judgment out there, or if I don't like the coworker, I can add that and infuse my feelings about that. If I do like the coworker, then I can minimize the other person's problem because I like the coworker. I think they're a good person. Do you see where I'm going with this? It doesn't matter who the coworker is. If they wanted me to know who it was, don't you think they would have said so from the start? I mean, here's the thing. Maybe I'm the coworker that they have the problem with, and they just don't want to tell me that yet. Or maybe it's my best friend that they have the problem with. Do you see where I'm going with this? We don't need to know who the coworker is. However, there is something that was shared that could be clarified. When they say they have a problem could be a multitude of things. And if I'm going at this with the intent of being positive and helping this person, what I need to do is help them hash through what they're feeling and what they're going through. So I would say something like a clarifying question or a clarifying statement would be something like, help me understand what you mean when you say problem. Now what I have done is I've put the ball back in that person's court and I've caused them to start really thinking about what the problem is. And as they start thinking about what the problem is, and as I encourage them to keep sharing more, they can then work through and process and get through everything they need to figure out what the problem really is and what they can do to solve that problem for themselves. So clarifying questions only. All right, the first D in ladder, don't. We've got a couple of don'ts coming up here. Don't interrupt. When we interrupt others, this one is kind of a given, but people do it all the time. Don't interrupt others. When you do that, it minimizes the other person and it conveys that what we have to say is more important than what they have to say. Quite frankly, when you interrupt others, it's rude, it's disrespectful, and it's inappropriate. So when you're listening, don't do it. And the funny thing here is people always say, but Angie, if I don't tell them what I'm thinking, I'm going to forget what I have to say. Good. Forget what you have to say. It doesn't matter. You're there to listen, not to talk. So don't interrupt. The second D, the second don't, is don't change the subject. A lot of times we're good at this. And that's why I say when you ask questions, oftentimes when you ask those questions that are not clarifying questions, all you're doing is changing the subject. You're hijacking and taking over the conversation. You're sending it in a different direction than the person wants to go. So don't change the subject. The E represents empathy. Empathy is so critically important when you're listening. If you go at it with the mindset that when I listen to the other person, I'm simply here to try to understand where they're coming from and I need to help them solve their problem. Empathy is one of the keys to making that happen. When you listen to someone and you exercise empathy, it means you're working to see it as they see it and feel it as they feel it. Okay, it's not about seeing it as I see it and feeling it as I feel it. It's seeing it as they see it, feeling it as they feel it. Essentially, it's kind of like, or metaphorically, it's like stepping into their shoes and taking a walk around the block. Exercise empathy. And then the R represents responsive listening. And I want to be very clear that when we talk about responsive listening, it doesn't mean talking and asking questions. I'm not saying you have to always be giving these massive responses. We can be responsive without saying anything by being fully present with the person, by showing acknowledgments, letting them know, making eye contact, maybe head nods, things like that, so they understand and they know that you're tracking along with them, that you're following along. Nonverbal communication, door openers, these are all things that we can do to be responsive listeners. So, like I said, a lot of people, when we talk about these things, find it hard, difficult, frustrating. A lot of people disagree because we've been programmed to listen a certain way our whole lives. And that's kind of how we are. We're problem solvers. A lot of people are problem solvers by nature. The problem is when you incorporate that into listening, you're not truly listening. So if you want to expand your influence, become a better listener, just trust me on this one, engage some of these principles when it comes to listening. And I think you'll be surprised just at how much you can increase your influence. So as we wrap things up, I just want to share with you a quote that I feel, sums up influence perfectly. And just kind of as you leave today, thinking about what kind of influence do you want to have on others and what are those areas that you want to work on. So this is a quote from J.R. Miller. He says, "There have been meetings of only a moment which have left impressions for life, for eternity. No one can understand that mysterious thing we call influence, yet every one of us continually exerts influence, either to heal, to bless, to leave marks of beauty, or to wound, to hurt, to poison, or to stain the lives of others." So as we end this section today, what do you want your influence to be? Just really think about that. That should be your takeaway. What do you want your influence to be? What do you need to work on in order to be a person of influence? And on that note, if you are interested in expanding your influence, I just want to share with all of you that I am hosting, starting in February, I'm hosting something called the Change Your World Transformation Table. So if you're not familiar with what a transformation table, it's a values-based leadership development lesson designed to encourage self-reflection and consistent action. So the lesson topics in this 6-week transformation table will include hope, listening that we just talked about, valuing every person, integrity, forgiveness, and multiplication. So if you're interested in being a part of my transformation table, like I said, it's going to run for 6 weeks on Wednesday evenings, starting February 3rd through March 10th. It'll be held from 6:30 to 8 in the evening. I'm going to do it via Zoom for right now because it's not a good idea yet to get together and actually have a real table. I have 8 seats available and there is no cost to participate. So if you are interested in joining that transformation table and expanding on some of the topics we covered today, I welcome you to do that. You can go ahead and just send me an email and I will get you registered for that. One last thing to remind everybody of is next month, February 17th, we're going to have the 3rd part of our series. I'm going to be covering Today Matters, some daily practices to guarantee tomorrow's success. And then finally, just want to remind everybody, if you've seen the announcements and advertisements for the Live to Lead fundraising event that we're doing with the Chamber of Commerce. Today is the last day to get the tickets on that. So if you go up to the Chamber website, I believe it is on the Chamber calendar to get the registration info. All right, throw it back to you, John. I think we got a couple minutes left.
Thanks, Angela. I guess if we have 2 minutes, we would have some time for a question or two. Now would be an appropriate time to ask a question. So if anybody has something burning right now, now's the time to just use the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen, or the chat button. That's fine too. You know, those programs that Angela discussed are great offerings. So, you know, please take advantage of those programs. And as I mentioned before, Angela's comes to us highly qualified, is a great presenter and does very good quality programming. So we're happy to be partnering with her on these sessions. So it doesn't appear there's any questions coming in. So again, join us again next month on the 17th for the next bite-sized learning session. And with that, Angela, thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Have a great day, everyone.